Hey everybody, this is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, and before we get into the action today, I wanted to take a few seconds to talk about Anchor. Anchor is a great app and it is free to use. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Did I mention it's free? There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. That's the Anchor app or anchor.fm to get started today. Happy podcasting. And now, let's get into it. What's going on, everybody? This is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Thank you for tuning in today. This is episode number 12. Super excited to be making this one. I know I've been on a bit of a leave of absence, a bit of a brief hiatus, but I am back and ready to talk about some rock and metal with you guys. So today, for episode number 12, the topic is the Jimi Hendrix Experiences. Are You Experienced? Release on this day of recording, May the 12th, 1967. And that is total coincidence. I did not plan to record this episode on the same day as the album was released, but it's a happy circumstance, or it's a happy coincidence, so yeah. So let's get into it. So the album, before we talk about the album and the specific track by tracks and the impact of the album and the legacy and all of the nitty gritty, let's just talk about broad overlaying, who is Jimi Hendrix? Who is the Jimi Hendrix Experience? What does this album mean? And then we'll get into the track by tracks like we normally do. So for starters, who is Jimi Hendrix? If you are any kind of rock or metal fan and you don't know who Jimi Hendrix is, shame on you, because you should absolutely 100% know who Jimi Hendrix is. He is widely considered one of the greatest guitarists of all time. That depends on who you talk to, but in my book, he's definitely up there, probably number one. I haven't really thought about a list, but that could be a podcast episode. Best guitarist of all time, my favorite guitarist of all time. That could definitely be an episode. But Jimmy would definitely be in there, and he would be in most people's lists, I believe, just because of the quality of his playing, the impact that his playing had. It was very, very influential and significant in all of rock and metal history. So, the Jimi Hendrix Experience forms in the mid-60s. The album Are You Experienced was recorded from the fall of 1966 to the spring of 1967. So, the band forms. Obviously, Jimi Hendrix is the main star. This is his experience. It's centered around his guitar talent and his overall persona, and he's the engine of the band. He's the mind of the band. He drives the boat, so to speak. And before the experience, Jimmy was playing in R&B circuits. He was playing in a group called The Animals and other just acts, trying to make it as an artist. Certain labels had rejected him and kind of pushed him away. He had the bass player, I believe, from The Animals, Chas Chandler, became kind of Jimmy's close companion and eventually goes on to produce Are You Experienced, the album that we will be talking about today. So that's kind of, those two have sort of a relationship, and Chandler kind of helps to get Jimmy to promote him and get interest in Jimmy from different record labels and different entities in the music business. And eventually Hendrix goes to London. So Hendrix is from America. I believe he was born in Seattle, Washington, and he goes to London, where he is connected with Noel Redding, who plays guitar, bass for The Experience, and Mitch Mitchell, who is on drums for The Experience. So these are both people out of London. They form a trio. At this point in rock history, power trios were becoming quite common. think of power trios, I think of, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, bands like Cream. There are other examples, but those are definitely two noteworthy examples. So that's how the Experience is kind of formed, and Are You Experienced is the debut album from that group. It's an immediate hit with the fans, the critics. It's definitely remarkable. It's stayed in the Billboard charts for 106 weeks. That's the Billboard LP charts, I think, because then it charted on the Billboard R&B charts because the charts were split up weird. But the important thing to take away is that it was incredibly successful. Personally, I think this is my favorite Jimi Hendrix album. It's got some of his best work, and if you're looking to get into Jimi Hendrix or looking for a good starting point, there's really no better place than the first album. It's a great place to dive in for newcomers, and it's a great classic point for veteran listeners to return to and really just enjoy what they're hearing. So that's kind of the setup for the Jimi Hendrix Experience and the first album, and they really get right to work. So, as we do on the show, we like to break albums down track by track. So I'm going to do that now. But before I do, I think it's important to note the discrepancies that exist in the track listings. There is several different variations in the tracks. So the original, there was a UK, European release, and then there is the North American release, and those differ. They both have 11 tracks, but some have certain tracks that others don't, and vice versa. And later on, when CD releases came around and there were other reissuings of the albums, it was expanded from 11 tracks to 17. And even then, there was different tracks released on the reissues. So there's a difference, I'm sure, nowadays with Spotify and even YouTube and all the different ways to get music. Most of this stuff can be found. But today, when I'm doing the track-by-track breakdown, I will be talking about the North American original track listing. So those 11 songs that if you would have gone to a record store in 1967 and picked up Are You Experienced, these 11 songs would have been on there. A record store in North America, mind you. So that's kind of what I'm going to be breaking down. So, these are all tracks that were written by Jimi Hendrix. Like I said, he's the brain, he's the engine, he is the center of attention, clearly, of the Jimi Hendrix Experience. So we start off, track 1, kind of a lesser-known song, not really that famous, called Purple Haze. Clocks in at about 2 minutes and 46 seconds, and of course, it is not a lesser-known song. It is not, kind of a deep take or a deep cut. It is the most famous Jimi Hendrix song, next to maybe All Along the Watchtower. According to Spotify, All Along the Watchtower was number 1, but number 2 was Purple Haze. So Purple Haze is clearly a huge part of Jimi Hendrix's catalog and his overall legacy. Another thing that Jimi Hendrix was known for and is kind of part of his legacy is psychedelic rock and psychedelia in general. At this time, music was, drug culture was fusing to create some interesting music. You think about the Beatles and then Jimi Hendrix and other bands that were coming out around this time. And Purple Haze, the title, obviously, and certain lyrical aspects of the work, they kind of use imagery that's associated with, drug use and what have you. But Hendrix kind of stated that the song wasn't necessarily about drug use particularly. I think, it's all kind of up to what you believe, what you interpret as a listener. I think that's kind of the beauty of music. Certain works are straightforward. It is this way, and there's no real getting around it. But other things, I think they're more open to interpretation. What does this song mean to you? It can mean something different for everyone. And I think that's a beautiful thing about music. So, Purple Haze, the song itself, normally a band, when they're releasing an album, they will release singles prior to release. So this was the second single. So there was a song that was released, Hey, Here We Are, The Experience, and then another song, which was Purple Haze, the second single released from this album. So people were still kind of getting a taste of Jimi Hendrix and The Experience and kind of what they're all about. But psychedelia, psychedelic rock, those are themes and those are subjects and kind of genres that Jimi Hendrix dabbles in and that I will mention a lot throughout this album, because it really is all throughout his music, and it really acts as a time capsule of when this music was coming out. But the song, if we talk lyrically, Hendrix describes this as a love song. So he loves this girl so much, he's in a haze, he's kind of caught purple haze all in his brain, he's like in a trance almost. That's kind of the argument Hendrix was saying. And who's to say how true that is? Because just because he's saying this to the media and the press and the journalists and the critics doesn't necessarily make it true. Because if we think 1967, Europe and America, how, comfortable are many people in the masses going to be with drug use? Now, Jimi Hendrix's fans likely were very comfortable with drug use and likely had no problem with the artist writing a song about, getting high and all that. But to the masses, to the people he's trying to ultimately sell records to, that might not be so good for his brand. So maybe someone, maybe not Hendrix himself, but maybe a producer or a manager kind of steered him in the direction of this or that. But it should be noted that Purple Haze had been a lot of different meanings interpreted to it, whether Hendrix has different meanings to it or the fans like to draw their own meanings from it, and I think that's a beauty of this song. Prior to the release of Purple Haze, the final cut, the 2-minute and 46-second length that we hear, and that is most commonly played today, Hendrix had talked about how there was 1,000 words in it, and it was just this really long, epic piece that he was trying to weave into a song. And the original title, I believe, was something along the lines of Purple Haze, Jesus Saves. So different themes and imagery there with religion and different just characteristics of this track. But if you don't know Purple Haze, you should do yourself a favor and stop what you're doing and give it a listen. It's one of the greatest guitar tracks ever. Hendrix, as I said, is a master guitar player. Rolling Stone ranked it as the number 2 greatest guitar song of all time. So high praise for Jimi Hendrix, which is absolutely well-deserved. He is a master at guitar, one of the best to ever do it, and Purple Haze is a song that perfectly illustrates that. So if you haven't heard this song, do yourself a favor and take a listen. Moving on to track 2, Manic Depression, clocks in at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. In preparation for this podcast, I had been listening back to the album and kind of taking notes as I listened along. I really like the flow of this track. The drummer, Mitch Mitchell, was heavily jazz influenced, so music writers and different critics often note the jazz backing that kind of exists in the Experience, and that's kind of can be found throughout their tracks. So I think that was something that was noticed and was noticeable in the drum section, especially jazz-influenced drumming. And I like how it's layered in terms of the lyrical content of this song. Different people, have different interpretations. I haven't looked at too much into what the lyrics are really about. I just like the way Hendrix sings. Hendrix is obviously much better known for a guitar player, and he's a guitar wizard, and that is all true, but I like the way he emphasizes and he vocalizes what he's saying. I think it's just the passion in his voice and just the emotion that he's singing with that probably draws me in, and likely draws other people in. But Manic Depression, some people have noted that it's kind of maybe not about, depression or a manic depression or any kind of state like that, but more about romantic frustration. This is what certain critics have drawn from the lyrics, but it's kind of up to your own interpretation, whatever you seek fit. So the album starts off great. This album is honestly very solid. So if you're into music from this kind of era, it is kind of dated in terms of production quality and stuff like that, but that doesn't make it bad by any stretch at all. I mean, the older music is sometimes where the best stuff lies. So I could see people very well listening to this album straight through and finding zero blemishes. There are a few songs for me personally that I'm not exactly 100% in love with, but there's definitely songs that I love on here. And Manic Depression, it's a fine song. Definitely not as memorable or as important as Purple Haze or other songs we'll get to, but Manic Depression, perfectly fine Jimi Hendrix song, and a perfectly decent track overall. So we move on now to track number 3, Hey Joe. 3 minutes and 23 seconds in length. This was the first single released from the album, so this was the first taste of the Jimi Hendrix experience that the public was given. Hey Joe is a live staple of Hendrix. It's a very influential song. I'm going to pull up his top 5 here again on Spotify to see just where Hey Joe clocks in, and it's at number 4 with 182. I was thinking about this earlier. I don't know if Spotify measures this in plays or downloads or how many times it's been liked. I think it's how many times it's been liked, so 182 times. 182 million, that is, not 182. That wouldn't be that many, but it clocks in at 4, so there's All Along the Watchtower, Purple Haze, Little Wing, which, just as a side note here, I love Little Wing. It is so good. Then there's Hey Joe and Voodoo Child. So those are the top 5 Jimi Hendrix songs on Spotify, and 2 of those come off this album, being Purple Haze and Hey Joe, and 2 of them are in the first 3 tracks on the album, so it really just, I think, speaks to the legacy of this album and the importance of this album and the strength of this album overall. So it's one of the greatest songs of all time. Rolling Stone has a list of 500 greatest songs of all time. Hey Joe is in there. I believe Purple Haze was as well. So number 201 is where Purple Haze, or Hey Joe is rather, on the 500 greatest songs of all time. I don't know where Purple Haze is on that list. If it is on that list, let me have a look here. I know I should have researched this before. My apologies. Let's take a look. Number 17 on the 500 greatest songs of all time list. Purple Haze is 17th. Hey Joe is 201, I said. Yes? Let me just skim here and just make sure I don't want to misquote myself. Yes. So, obviously, the first 3 tracks in this album, 2 of them are already considered the 500 greatest songs of all time. So, clearly that speaks to the legacy and the impact that Jimi Hendrix has and this album specifically has. When I listen to Hey Joe, it's kind of relaxing. You know, if you go listen to metal or anything like that, it's really high energy, a lot of stuff going on instrumentally, kind of in your face. Hendrix just kind of singing along, and then he's really putting his soul and a lot of energy into that guitar work. It's really beautiful, and a lot of emotion in the vocals too. You know, when he gets to the part where he talks about "and I shotta," and he just really just wails on that guitar. It's hard not to play air guitar listening to Jimi Hendrix's work. There's been many different variations and versions of this song over time, and that's another common theme. A lot of Jimi Hendrix's work has been covered and done over by different artists over time, which, again, speaks to the impact and influence that he's had on people from all genres, not just rock and roll, and not just the metal genre. And it's hard to say he had much, because at the time when he was coming up, if Jimi Hendrix's relationship to metal, if we could talk about that for a second, metal didn't really exist yet. It was still a few years early, so that kind of, his guitar technique definitely influenced metal artists down the line. So while there may not have been metal at the time specifically, his impact down the road definitely played a role in guitar playing found in metal. So it's a very, very good song. Again, the emotion, the narrative that kind of follows, you know, Hey Joe, I think of it as someone saying, you know, this is, hey Joe, I'm in trouble, like, telling a story almost. And I think those are the best kind of songs, something that tells a story, something the listener can follow along and kind of be taken through twists and turns. 1966, the Byrds had a version of Hey Joe. It's called Hey Joe, Where You Gonna Go? As I said, there's different versions of this song, different recordings, but the Jimi Hendrix version, for all things considered, is the most popular version. And while I haven't heard the other versions, I'll take the Jimi Hendrix version over those other versions. So, moving on, we have Lover Confusion. That's track 4 on the album, track 4, side 1. 3 minutes and 15 seconds, Lover Confusion is. So, it's not a song that I'm a huge fan of. It's not a song I dislike, but it's not one that I'm going to be like, yeah, I want to hear that one. It's more so, oh, it comes on, yeah, I'll listen through this. I like the echo effects. I'm not sure if echo effect is the right word, but Hendrix is doing an interesting effect on his vocals in this one. He mentions love in the lyrics, so again, I'm noticing that as kind of a common theme. Love and just kind of romanticism and just kind of passion are kind of mentioned in his lyrics. That's subject matter that is clearly important to him, and he writes about frequently. Hendrix has some excellent playing in the song, is what I noted, which you could say about literally every Jimi Hendrix song, because he is a guitar god. He is one of the best to ever pick up a guitar, maybe the best. In my opinion, he is the best. So, that's kind of a bland note. You could say that about every song. The song, in terms of the backing, with the drums and the rhythm section, it's kind of less compressed. It's more open, more flowing. Kind of Jimmy, sings the lyrics, plays a little guitar. It's good, nice, and flowing. So nothing wrong with this song. Maybe not a highlight from the album, but a perfectly fine song nonetheless. So we move on to track 5 from side 1, May This Be Love. That was 2 minutes and 55 seconds in length. One of the shorter songs so far, not the shortest. The shortest is on side 2, a track called Fire, which we'll get to in just a minute. But 2 minutes and 55 seconds, so it's under 3 minutes, so not incredibly long, but May This Be Love has a very psychedelic flow to it, and it is one of my favorite tracks from this album. It's very underrated in my opinion. If people who are just kind of casual Jimi Hendrix fans look at this album, they say, oh, Purple Haze, Hey Joe, The Wind Cries Mary, Foxy Lady, those are great songs. And they all are. That is 100% true. But May This Be Love, whoa, that deserves some recognition. That deserves some attention. I think it is a very good song and very underrated overall. The use of slide guitar and the pattern of drums and the drum beat, it's kind of like flowing. It's like water almost. Very psychedelic feel. It's a beautiful song centered around love, as the title suggests. May This Be Love. One of the best off the album, and extremely underrated in my opinion. Flies under the radar, but when it comes on, it's so beautiful, and I don't know how else to describe it. So a very, very high quality track, very oftentimes overlooked, but definitely a quality track nonetheless. So to finish out side 1, we have a track called I Don't Live Today, 3 minutes and 55 seconds long. I like his voice on this one. As I mentioned earlier, I like the way Hendrix vocalizes things, and I like the way he sounds. He's not known for being a vocalist, but personally I'm drawn to that, just the way he sings. After doing a little bit of reading on this track, it was dedicated to minority groups, specifically Native Americans, given Jimi Hendrix's, I believe it was Cherokee heritage that he had. So the lyrics have some deeper meaning than that. He dedicates the song to American Indian groups and other minority groups. So, take from that what you will, read into that what you will. Before reading up on that wasn't immediately apparent to me, but it's still interesting nonetheless. I was unaware of Jimi Hendrix's Cherokee heritage, so I think that's kind of interesting. And he does a lot of experimental stuff with the guitar, a lot of stuff with feedback, and what might just sound like noise, but it's really again, kind of that psychedelic rock, kind of trying to make sounds that wouldn't necessarily be considered music into music, and just kind of controlled chaos towards the end of this track. And it just kind of ends side one, and it's a perfectly fine ending to the first side. It's kind of another song where I'm not super crazy about or super high on, but it's a perfectly fine track nonetheless, and it fits right in with the other songs on the album. So we flip to side two. Side two has 5 tracks on it, and it closes out the album. That's how this works. Excuse me. And we start side two with The Wind Cries Mary, clocking in at 3 minutes and 21 seconds. The Wind Cries Mary is another one of the most recognizable tracks off this album. Another live staple that Hendrix performed often. Another song from this album that appeared on the Rolling Stones 500 Greatest Songs of All Time list. So clearly, just as Purple Haze and Hey Joe did, The Wind Cries Mary created its mark on rock and roll. It has been described as a rock ballad, which I think is appropriate. Hendrix's playing is very good here, as always. It's kind of secondary, I would say. I don't think that's too extreme to say. It's not too, intricate or insane, and I think what he's singing about, the lyrics, I think is taking precedent here over what he's playing. And The Wind Cries Mary. The song kind of has different meanings. It's all about who you kind of believe and who you talk to. Hendrix's girlfriend at the time says the song came out of an argument between the two of them. I guess he wrote the song after the two of them got in an argument. Her name wasn't Mary, but her middle name was Mary, so that there's a possible connection there. And The Wind Cries Mary. Hendrix suggests that the song represents many people and maybe isn't coming out of an argument between the two of them, but nonetheless, it's definitely a live staple and definitely a very common Jimi Hendrix song, and more laid back than some other ones. Not as rock and roll per se as it's been described, kind of a rock ballad, but it's a perfectly good song, one of my favorites, and I like the way he just I can just hear him now singing The Wind Cries Mary, and it's very laid back, and it's perfectly fine, and yeah, it's a great song. So moving on now to track number 2 on side 2, called Fire. 2 minutes and 34 seconds, the shortest track on this album. It's very groovy. I like kind of the flow of it. I like how that all pieced together. It's got a psychedelic vibe to it, as most of these tracks do, but it's kind of funky at the same time. There have been different cover versions of this. Red Hot Chili Peppers did a cover of Fire. Alice Cooper has done a cover of Fire. It's pretty short, but that's okay. It kind of just gets through it. There's like a chorus section where, I'm guessing Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding kind of act as backup vocals, and it blends together and it creates kind of a bigger sound. Yeah, I don't have too many notes about Fire. I don't have a problem with the album or the song per se, but it is what it is. It's just kind of short, sweet, and there's no complication. There's no secondary meaning. It's all laid out right in front of you. So we move on now to track 3 on the side 2. That is Third Stone from the Sun. And this is the longest track on the album, coming in at 6 minutes and 40 seconds. I believe on Spotify, maybe with the reissue, it's 6 minutes and 44 seconds. So those 4 seconds really don't make much of a difference. It's over 6 minutes regardless. So this is a pretty instrumental track. It's largely instrumental. There are a few spoken word passages. And as the title suggests, it's kind of about Earth and the universe, and I guess those were topics that interested Hendrix enough to write a song about them. The psychedelic rock genre is displayed in this track once again, and more of those jazz influences that I mentioned earlier that likely Mitch Mitchell was driving on the behind the drum set, that's kind of fused together with Psychedelia. It's interesting combo. This was one of the first ideas that they had as an experience, as the Jimi Hendrix experience. It might have even been the first one they recorded, not the first one they released. Obviously, that was Hey Joe, but you know, Third Stone from the Sun, it's good. Again, kind of as was on I Don't Live Today, there's kind of that more what some might call just noise. Hendrix experimenting with feedback and different guitar sounds and just trying to push different sounds out of the instrument and just kind of really experimenting. And that's really something unique that was happening in Hendrix's time. And that's another reason why Hendrix is considered one of the greats. His experimentation and his willingness to push the limits and make different sounds and try different things. But overall, it's another song I just kind of don't strongly gravitate towards, but after giving it kind of a second listen today and listening to it a few times throughout the week, it's perfectly fine, and it might not be my favorite, and it might not be a fan favorite, but it fits. There's nothing wrong with it. And again, the psychedelic and jazz combo is interesting. So we've only got 2 tracks left here. As I said, there are other tracks. There was the 17-track reissue, so that would add 6 more tracks on. I'm not going to get into all of that today. If you are curious, though, you can find that. For me, it's available on Spotify. I don't know about Apple Music, but on Spotify, you can get the full 17-track reissue that came out in the late 1990s, and that's available. And that would include, those 6 tracks that were recorded at the time, but were not released originally. So we move on now to track 4 on side 2, and that is Foxy Lady. And as I mentioned earlier, there was The Wind Cries, it was Hey Joe was the first single, Purple Haze was the second single, and then Foxy Lady is the third and final single. So there were only 3 singles for this album: Hey Joe, Purple Haze, and Foxy Lady. It's another one that's a pretty famous Jimi Hendrix track, according to Spotify. It isn't top 5 in terms of popularity. It is number 8. So make of that what you want, but could be number 8, could be number 12. It's still a damn good song. There was a critic I read when I was doing some research for this podcast. He had mentioned that if there was a song to encapsulate Jimi Hendrix's entire catalog, and if you had someone who had never heard Jimi Hendrix before and you played him one track to introduce him to Hendrix, Foxy Lady would be the track. So it's 3 minutes, 15 seconds long. Another one of these tracks on this album that is mentioned in the 500 greatest songs of all time, Rolling Stone magazine's list. So that just shows how impressive this album is. I believe 4 of these songs are in the Rolling Stone Top 500. It's really impressive. A frequent live performance. I have on disc here the Jimi Hendrix Experience live at Monterey on disc. And let's see, did they play Foxy Lady? It was the second track they played. Foxy Lady. And then he just makes that guitar talk, does what he does best. It's an extremely famous song. Pretty straightforward lyrically, too. It's about a foxy lady. So no real, reading between the lines here. Straightforward, rocks. Jimmy does a great job on guitar. As always, the rest of the Experience does great. And as some have noted, if you want a song to display the entire Experience, Foxy Lady is your song. So we close out side 2, track 5. It closes out the entire album. Are You Experienced? 3 minutes and 55 seconds. There's kind of a drone-like sound, and I was doing some research into why things kind of sound the way they do. They had played the drum part and the guitar part backwards. So, and after reading that, I could kind of hear it. I'm like, oh, this makes sense. So Hendrix they kind of layered it. I don't know the exact recording techniques they did, but I know that it's played backwards. So that's interesting. That's another kind of psychedelic thing, trying new things. Jimi Hendrix kind of pushing the envelope, being experimental. playing a track backwards is something that kind of Hendrix does different on this album, and that's unique and noteworthy and really kind of makes his legacy, strengthens his legacy. I did different things. That's what Hendrix could say, So it's a very psychedelic track, much like others on this album. That's kind of a theme of the entire album. That's something that is displayed a lot throughout the album. So, Are You Experienced? It's a perfectly fine song. Let me see here. Do I have it liked? I don't, actually. So I must not have liked it after my first listen. It's fine. Not something I'll be like, yeah, put on that one. But again, a perfectly fine Jimi Hendrix song, and I would have no problem if someone said, hey man, I love that song, because I wouldn't blame him. So we get to final thoughts here. My final thoughts on this album, taking a step back. We've gone through track by track, now just kind of evaluating this as a whole. Where does it stand, in rating, 1 to 10? How important is this album to me? What does this album mean to the history of rock and roll? So, this is a beautiful intro to Jimi Hendrix. If you're like, man, I want to get into Jimi Hendrix, but I don't know where to start. Well, you're in luck. Hendrix's career was unfortunately cut short, as many of you likely know. He is a member of the 27 Club, so he died at the age of 27. He really only released 3 albums with the Jimi Hendrix Experience. There's Are You Experienced? Axis Bold as Love, and the last one is slipping my mind. Oh, no. I'm drawing a blank here. Electric Ladyland. And now, obviously, of course, there's, kind of unreleased material, and there's live albums. So there's a lot more in his discography, but those are the 3 main pillars of his original released stuff. So this is a great starting point. What better place to start than the first album? It's one of the finest rock albums of all time, I would say, undoubtedly. I mean, how many tracks were listed in the Rolling Stone Top 500 Songs of All Time? Includes some of the greatest guitar work of all time, which is no surprise because Jimi Hendrix is a wizard on the guitar. So, it's a great album. You should definitely check it out. I'm a big fan. And I think most people who are into rock should know at least one of these songs. So I think it's definitely a staple, something that most people should listen to if they have not already. So if I had to rate it out of 10, I think I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I think that's fair. I think, not quite enough to give it above a 9. And if someone wanted to argue maybe like an 8 or 0.5 or an 8.7, but I wouldn't go much lower than that. So that's about all I've got in terms of talking about Are You Experienced? I had a lot of fun doing this episode today. I'm sorry about the break in the action that we kind of experienced there for a little while. Be sure to follow the podcast on Instagram. Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast is the account name, all one word. And be sure that if you have any suggestions or you have comments about the podcast, let me know there. Comment on a post or slide in the DMs. Let me know, please, because I want to be able to create the best podcast for you guys. So, looking towards next week, episode 13, I'm going to be talking about Pearl Jam's 10, released in 1991. I'm a big Pearl Jam fan. I like some grunge music, but Pearl Jam especially. So if you are a Pearl Jam fan, or you like grunge music, or you're curious about either and want to learn more, be sure to tune in next week. And if you're a fan of the podcast, or you like what you heard here today, but you've missed past episodes, you can go back and check those out. We're on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, a bunch. If you check the link in my bio, the podcast page, or if you check Owen W409 on Instagram, that is my personal account. There will be links to all sorts of different places to listen to the podcast. But no matter where you listen, I thank you for supporting and keeping this thing going. When I was kind of on a break there, I was having doubts of if I should continue, but I decided to keep going, and here I am. So I hope you guys enjoy, and as always, never stop rocking.